Hey friends, it's Gloria and welcome back to another video. The most exciting video of the year. Well, it's January, but I love watching end of year content and people's favorite lists. I already have so many books on Libby Holds that have been on people's favorites, and I hope you can find one from this list that will be on your TBR as well, maybe to read in the new year, but no pressure. I mean, I have unpopular opinions about books, so you never know. But I have 13 books to mention that I enjoyed reading this year. In general, 2024 was a bit of a flop. I had like 1 or 2 5-star reads. So a lot of these were 4-star reads for me. I don't necessarily think that means anything. It's more of a feeling for me of whether a book is like amazing, but I haven't had a lot of amazing books where I just read it, I devour it, I finish it, I'm raving about it. It's emotionally impacting for me. That hasn't happened too often, unfortunately. But I do have 13 books that were really good. There's one 5-star book on this list that is genuinely an excellent read and was the most amazing reading experience that I would reread again. And the other ones are all really good, really solid books, and I'll tell you why. But yeah, I'm hoping for more amazing reads in 2025. That's why I'm scouring the favorites list and hoping to find some that work for me too. So please let me know your #1 top 5-star most amazing read that you read in 2024, so maybe that I can pick it up in 2025 and it will be a favorite for me too. Here's hoping. Let's get into the books. I'm gonna do categories by genre because that's what I usually do. So let's start with, should I just start with my favorite book of the year? I think I will. I'm gonna start with the absolute favorite, the cream of the crop, the book that was absolutely incredible for me, and that is Unequal Affections by Laura S. Armiston. This is a Pride and Prejudice retelling. I didn't even know that I wanted to read that. I picked this up on a total whim, and I believe there's an audiobook available only on Audible, but the hard copy book is impossible to find. It's not on sale really anywhere. Libraries don't have it. I got the Kindle version of it on Libby, and that's how I read it, but it is so good. It was beautiful, and dare I say, better than the original story. I said it. I said it. Jane Austen fans, do not come at me. But 2025 is Jane Austen's 250th birthday. I know people are celebrating. They are doing Jane Austen things this year. If you are a fan of Jane Austen, please pick up this book and read it. It is so good. This retelling starts with what if Elizabeth Bennet accepted Mr. Darcy's proposal the first time he did it, and the book is their 8-week courtship. So within that time period, she has to deal with the whole situation of her not liking him and how rude he was, and the whole thing with Mr. Wickham. They have to deal with all of those emotions and all of that misinformation and miscommunication, and it's done so well and so romantically. I loved being in the inner thought life of both Mr. Darcy and Elizabeth. I absolutely loved every single minute of this. I think it was so true to Austen and the original story. It was beautiful, and like I said, I think it was better. Like, this beats out the original story for me. I would love to see like a movie version, because the Keira Knightley one's my favorite. I would love to see that, but like with this storyline. I just thought it was so good. I thought it was so good. So please do yourself a favor and read it if you are an Austen fan. Since that feels historical, let's talk about historical fiction. I sadly have only 2 to talk about. Historical fiction is my all-time favorite genre, and I read so much of it, and I had like no wins in 2024. I mean, I have 2. I have 2 to talk about that I really enjoyed reading, but nothing at all, like a whole slew of them that I loved. So that is one of my goals for this next year, is to hopefully find some really good ones. But I will talk about one of my favorites that I picked up is Maisie Dobbs by Jacqueline Winspear. I made it through 13 books in the series in 2024. There's 18 books total. I plan to finish it out in 2025. This is a mystery series, but it is historical. It starts right after the First World War. It deals with Maisie Dobbs as she is in the war, and a little bit of her romance and her friendships and her upbringing, and then it follows her being a private investigator and different mysteries. Ultimately, the series tells a lot of the ramifications of the First World War in Britain and how people were affected from all different walks of life, and it was so good. It was just so good. I really care about this character. I love her. I mean, she's not perfect, and the series is just very comforting, even though it is not cozy by any means, but it is comforting to return back to the series. People ask if it's formulaic. I think it is a little bit formulaic, but there's always some kind of lesson learned or new perspective understood or just empathy reached towards another kind of person. We get a little bit of growth from Maisie, but I would say she kind of stays consistent. I think that's maybe my one critique, is I wish there's a little bit more of her from the rest of the series, but I think even this one book alone is good on its own. You don't really even need to continue the series. This is just a great like historical mystery series that deals with World War I, and I definitely am now intrigued to learn more about the First World War. I know there's a lot of World War II fiction out there, but this is a fantastic book that just started my love of series reading, and I think that's something I learned about myself this year, so I will definitely be continuing on in this series, and I have some other ones up my sleeve for 2025 that when this one's done, I really hope to pick up. Stay tuned for that for my 2025 TBR though. The other one that has an ugly little sticker is The Women by Kristen Hanna. I really love this book. but I didn't love it like a lot of other people love it, but I thoroughly enjoyed reading it. I think more than anything because I have read no books about the Vietnam War, so very unfamiliar with that, and I thought it was just so brutal and realistic to read about this woman and just like the horrific things that she experienced and witnessed during the war. She was a combat nurse, and then life after the war and being a PTSD veteran, treated terribly because no one believed her. She was a very flawed character, and there's definitely aspects of this story that isn't a lot of people's favorites. There's a lot of infidelity and really stupid men and dumb relationships, like dumb romantic relationships that were a little bit eye-rolling and exhausting to read about. And she's a woman that just keeps making really poor decisions in her life, and it's just a downward spiral. It's pretty bleak and sad, but really well done at the same time. It's definitely not like an all-star favorite historical fiction for me, but it was a really good read, and I think exposed me to a different time period and a different perspective that I wasn't familiar with before. So there's that. Next, let's talk about thrillers and mysteries. I know I mentioned Maisie Dobbs is a mystery, and The Women is a very popular book, and this is a thriller mystery and also very popular on many people's favorites list of the year and on mine as well. The God of the Woods by Liz Moore. This was just so compelling. This is a book that I was so pleasantly surprised with my reading experience and how much I loved my time in it. This is a book that I sat down and read every single page physically, which if you know anything about my reading journey right now is I mostly do audiobooks only. I am a mom of a 15-month-old. I have no time to sit down and read. I basically only listen to audiobooks when I cook or clean, driving in the car, not even driving in the car because now I drive with my son, but basically I'd never have time to sit down and read a book physically, and I went through this one and zipped through it and was compelled every step of the way. This is a super million timelines book. There's tons of characters, tons of timelines. I think reading it physically also helped along with that. I can't imagine reading the audiobook. I feel like I would be a bit confused, but who knows? I think people did enjoy the audiobook. This is a missing children, family, secrets, drama, and none of those things really are buzzwords for me, but like I said, I was just compelled. I was pulled through. This has to do with a summer camp, and some children go missing in one timeline, and then the same family, there's another child that goes missing, and you just get to unpack the story very slowly, very character driven, and there's not really huge reveals. And when things are revealed, you know, it's not like, oh, shocking, crazy, I can't believe that happened. At least it wasn't for me. There's something very satisfying to read about this book, and definitely probably my biggest surprise in terms of my enjoyment level, because I had zero desire to read this book when it started popping up. I was like, this looks like some weird, gross, little slimy, creepy monster book. It wasn't. It was just, it's a family story, it's a character study, and it was so good. It was so interesting. I think this would make a very cool TV show, and it wasn't too dark. I was expecting this to be like really dark and gruesome or crude or something, you know, that thrillers, mystery, and horror readers enjoy, and this didn't really have any content that I usually avoid, so it was thoroughly surprising. Next, I have now read all 3 books by this author, and this last one was no exception. I absolutely loved it. I think it might be my favorite out of the bunch, which is The Unpopular Opinion. Worst Case Scenario by TJ Newman. Most people love her other books, Falling or Drowning. This one is about a plane that crashes into a nuclear power plant and what the heck would happen if that happened. Tons of characters as well. Super heart-wrenching. There's characters in here that you fall in love with, and you're just on the edge of your seat of whether they're gonna live or not, or what's gonna happen. It's a survival situation like all of her books are, and it was so good. It was so good. I loved the characters. I loved how she writes these stories, these survival, high stakes, thriller, fast-paced books. They're really fun to read. They're good palate cleansers, and they're not just like drama and action and crazy violence. They're interesting and compelling, and I loved every minute of it. She's a fantastic author. If you for some reason haven't picked her up, do yourself a favor and do it. TJ Newman, she does no wrong in my book. Another author that I consider a favorite author of mine, even though I have not read her entire backlist, that is Here One Moment by Leanne Moriarty. I read her book, newest release, and I absolutely loved it. It has some content that I don't necessarily gravitate towards. I think the big one is it has this fortune-telling vibe to it. People think that this is a magical realism book, but it's not. It's very much a woman who has this like kind of mental breakdown thing on a plane and predicts people's death and cause of death, when they're gonna die and how they die. And people are super confused about what the heck just happened. It's like this big viral moment, and then what she actually predicts starts happening. But all of that's really explained. And so it's not really a fortune-telling thing, even though that's part of the story because there's a little bit of background there. It's not really what the book's about. The book is about fate and grief. Again, another buzzword I don't like to read. It's very much an exception of the rule. I don't tend to gravitate towards books that are about grief, and this one very much has that as a theme. But it was so well done. Also, a lot of multiple perspectives, a lot of characters to keep track of, very short chapters. I zipped through this one in just like 2 days because I couldn't put it down. I was nighttime reading, but it was very compelling, so I was going through it. I think it's set in Australia, like a lot of her books are, or Australia, Tasmania, and I just loved how the story came together and all these characters weave together. And then there's one main character, the woman on the plane, and you get to know her story, and it's sad and heartbreaking and sweet. And the last line of the book, like the way the book ended was just perfection, and I just had like this one little tear that just rolled down my face because it was so good. It was like a happy laughing tear because it just ended perfectly. If you read a book and you are a mom, then you'll relate to that moment of the book for sure. But it was just really well done, and I am determined to read all of Leanne Moriarty's books. I want to get her down to 0, so that's my little stack of the author's books, and I hope to read a few more in 2025. Another spoiler for my 2025 TBR. Next, let's talk about some contemporary reads. Another very popular book that will be on people's favorites. Funny Story by Emily Henry is probably my favorite Emily Henry. I've read them all. I don't love them all. I don't read too many rom-coms at this point. I actually do read quite a few of the popular ones, but they're never amazing for me. I have problems sometimes. I roll my eyes and I'm a little bit judgy about them, even though I probably shouldn't be. But this one I just had a really good time with. About 2 people that are living together because they were in breakups and they need to move in to save money, and it's like a friendship to lovers, and there's a library aspect to the story. It was just very sweet. I liked them as characters. I read this a while ago and the details are a little bit lost on me, if I'm honest, but I just remember really enjoying it. And so I think this stands out as a contemporary romance read for me. Out of the many that I do read, a lot of them are duds, some I even hate a lot, but this one I thoroughly enjoyed. Next, a Rosamund Pilcher read, Winter Solstice, probably one of her most popular books. I read this at the beginning of 2024 and it was so cozy and wonderful. It commenced me into reading like 6 or 7 of Rosamund Pilcher's books in 2024. A lot of them were decent, a lot of them were bad and don't hold up, but this one definitely holds up. It is all set around the Christmas time in the Scottish Highlands, and it is cozy and very character driven. Literally nothing happens, like not much plot happens at all. It is all characters, but you care about them so much and so deeply. And there's definitely like some drama and romance that is a little bit eye-rolly for me, which makes it not the most perfect book ever, but it is very wholesome, and I totally understand why people love her. Her nature writing, her description, you just feel it. You feel the winter season, you feel the coziness of the characters and being in the Scottish Highlands in the cold. It is all just written so well. So definitely a standout. Definitely would recommend if you haven't picked it up during the winter season. And really quick, an honorable mention. This was like a 3.5 4-star series for me. It wasn't perfect. I was also so pleasantly surprised by it. I think God of the Woods I was pleasantly surprised by, and then this one, because I don't read fantasy, but I have a historical mystery romance fantasy for you. It is a 5-book series. It starts with Wormwood Abbey. It was also incredibly cozy, incredibly wholesome, very sweet, and it was just so fun. It is about a family that discovers that they are secret dragon keepers and that there's other families in England that keep dragons secret, and that is like a fun little aspect of the story. There's also a very like pining romance throughout it all, slow burn romance, and evil villains and mysterious things to unfold. It was a fun ride. It was very adventurous, also great description writing in Yorkshire and then in Wales, and some scenes in London. I definitely will be picking up more from this author as she writes more, and I think this is a very underrated series for those that love cozy fantasy. Like, that's all the rage these days. I don't necessarily care about that genre. I might dabble in a little bit more because of how much I enjoyed this, and I was so pleasantly surprised. Yeah, I think more people need to read it. For those that specifically like the genre, I think the series could be a really big hit. All right, so that's all fiction, and now I have 4 nonfiction books to talk about that I really loved, and I'm so happy to report that because I think the year before, in 2023, I had like no nonfiction that I enjoyed, and this year I have 4 to talk about. Let me start with a middle grade nonfiction that I also was just so pleasantly surprised by how good it was Mona Lisa Vanishes. This was the middle grade March read. It was so well done, like a fantastic nonfiction middle grade book about the Mona Lisa, her whole story, the whole extravaganza behind how popular she is and why, a little bit about Leonardo da Vinci's upbringing and how he got to creating that painting and how it got stolen at one point and what made her famous, and some historical aspects around Paris and the Louvre. It was so good, and there's some illustration within the book as well. If you are at all interested in art and art history, I feel like this one was a really fun one and would recommend. Audiobook was also really good. Another nonfiction history was 40 Autumns, a family story of courage and survival on both sides of the Berlin Wall by Nina Wilner. This was a brilliant piece of nonfiction work about the Berlin Wall and a family divided into East Germany and West Germany, and it was really interesting. I feel like I learned so much about the Berlin Wall history and also being behind the Iron Curtain in East Germany and what that was like. There's some aspects of history that I wasn't aware of that I should have been. I feel like I should have learned some of this maybe in school or college, but I didn't. And I found it so interesting, and I definitely want to read more books on this topic. So if you are familiar with any, please let me know. But if you are unfamiliar with this book and love a good family memoir or interested in the ramifications of Europe after the Second World War and what happened with some of that Iron Curtain, Soviet Union stuff, it was so interesting to read and really well told, very well researched and depicted. It was a wonderful family story and also really sad to read as well for so much that happened, but such an interesting book. Would highly recommend. I have 2 memoirs left. One is Dinner for Vampires, Life on a Cult TV Show while also in an actual cult by Bethany Joy Lentz. This is an interesting cover book. I feel like no one is really talking about it because maybe people don't know that it's a memoir, but Bethany Joy Lentz was on the TV show One Tree Hill, which I watched and loved. It was on CW, and she obviously talked about being on that show and some things that happened, but more than anything, this is about her being in a cult, and a very strange cult that seemingly was very innocent and like totally normal and just seemed like a normal Christian Bible study group, but it became so much more than that and was so destructive and just terrible. It was such an interesting and fascinating read. I consider myself a Christian and Jesus follower, and having that faith and then seeing just people completely warp that and warp the truth into manipulating people and just tell lies and falsehoods to, it was just so fascinating to read and absolutely heartbreaking. What a sad book to see how things unfolded. But I will say, throughout the whole book, she's never like super angry or cynical or just hating everything that happened. Like, she can hate it, but also there's joy because she got a daughter out of this whole thing and she loves her daughter. And that's so beautiful. And there's this moment at the end of the book where she's crying out to God, and I thought it was so honest and vulnerable and real, which I really appreciated. I just thought this was a beautifully well done story for someone who was in a cult and got out of it, and how she dealt with all of it. So definitely for those of you who like a cult book. I will say she doesn't shy away from swearing and language, so if that bothers some people, you know, maybe not for you, but in general, a really good book on cults, specifically being in a Christian cult. I feel like I hear about and see a lot of books about the Mormon faith, but this is very specifically the Christian faith, and again, just an innocent Bible study gone wrong. I think it's called like The Big Family Cult. Really well done. Just a wonderful memoir. Would highly recommend. Another one that was a pleasant surprise was How to Stay Married, the Most Insane Love Story Ever Told by Harrison Scott Key. This one was so entertaining. I was laughing and cracking up and also completely jarred and was so captivated by this whole story. I think it is an insane love story. Basically, Harrison Scott Key, one day his wife says, "Sorry, we're gonna get a divorce. I have an affair. I love someone else." And he's in complete shock because he's like, what happened? And it goes back into time of how they fell in love and got married. This book also explores spiritual formation, and he's a Christian guy and he talks about growing up in the South and then also just dealing with what he believes in and why, just how your faith intersects with certain things in your life. And it also, more than anything, deals with forgiveness. I mean, he decides to take his wife back, and it is a story again and again of things unfolding very tumultuously. I also just love how he told his story with humor, even though it deals with some very intense topics, but he doesn't take himself too seriously. I think for some people he might come off as arrogant or over the top, but I found it very funny. The moral of the story is forgiveness, even when you feel like you wouldn't be able to. A really fantastic nonfiction that I would recommend if you're interested in stories about marriage and infidelity and the ramifications after the fact and forgiving someone. This book is full of swear words, even though he, I believe, considers himself a Christian person. Not that Christians don't swear, but just take that with a grain of salt. The audiobook is also wonderfully executed because his jokes and how he intended every single line to come out in the book is obviously told very well as he narrates it himself. It's told with humor and gumption, and this was a really fun one. One I've recommended to a lot of people in real life, and the people that I've recommended to have really loved it. So pat on my shoulder when that happens. That doesn't always happen, but I love when that happens. So those are some books that I read in 2024 that were a fun time and I thoroughly enjoyed. It wasn't the best reading year. It really wasn't, and I'm hoping for a better one in 2025, but some of these are standouts. Please let me know if any of these have intrigued you and have now been put on your radar, or you've been motivated to pick them up. And like I said, what is your #1 favorite book that you read in 2024, and would you recommend it to me? Because I'm on the hunt for some good reads in 2025. Thank you so much for spending some time today with me, and I will see you guys in another book video soon. Bye.